Hi, my name's Isaac Shutt. I'm an estate planning attorney and I'm licensed to practice law both in Texas and in Wyoming. Today I'm going to give a very basic overview of the supplemental needs trust. Sometimes this is called a special needs trust or an SNT. Now, one thing I have to get out of the way right at the beginning is that you really should consult with an attorney if you're thinking about doing an SNT. This is really not something that you can or should DIY, because if you do an SNT wrong, it can be disastrous for the beneficiary. They could lose their governmental benefits, and that's a really big deal. So the first thing I'll say, just as a caveat to this video, is this isn't legal advice. This is just in the spirit of education. I really need you, if you're thinking about doing a special needs trust, go talk with a lawyer who has some experience with special needs trusts so that you know it has been done correctly. Okay, with that having been said, let's give you sort of a primer or the basics for special needs trusts. So let's start with some terminology. First of all, a trust is actually not a document. Trust is sort of a legal relationship, kind of in three parts, between the trustor, the trustee, and the beneficiary. So let's talk about the trustor. Sometimes the trustor is referred to as the grantor or the settlor, but that all means the same thing. That's the person who created the trust. So if you're the person who initially put a bunch of money into the trust, you are the grantor, the settlor, the trustor. The second person is the trustee. Sometimes the trustee and the trustor are the same person. But the job of the trustee is to manage the assets. So that's sort of an ongoing job, and they manage the assets for the benefit of the beneficiary. And so the beneficiary in this case is typically somebody with special needs. And so that could be somebody who was born with special needs or somebody who is receiving governmental benefits later in their life and they don't want to have money directly in their name. They'll have a special needs trust. So those are the basics of the relationship. So let's talk about sort of how this works and why this works. So let's start with the why. The why it works is that for so many governmental benefit programs, the recipient of those governmental benefits has to be poor or has to at least look poor on paper. And if they have too much assets in their name, then they're disqualified from receiving those governmental benefits. This is typically with SSI or Medicaid. And so if that person in today's dollars has more than about $2,000 to their name, then they're not eligible for those benefits. So I know it seems counterintuitive, but sometimes if you have a beneficiary who's receiving a Medicaid benefit, you actually don't want to name them the direct beneficiary because, as counterintuitive as it might seem, giving that person an inheritance kind of can harm them financially because sure, they got that inheritance, but they lost their benefits. So it's actually kind of a net loss to them. So that's kind of where the SNT comes in, because instead of giving an inheritance to that person's name, you're giving it to the trustee for the benefit of that beneficiary. So instead of those assets going under the recipient's social security number, it's now going into this SNT, so it's not negatively impacting their governmental benefits because that inheritance is not in their name. So, by the way, everything I'm saying here, it's not shady, it's not weird. The government knows that people do these kind of things. And in fact, there are hundreds, if not thousands of pages of regulations and rules and things like that dealing with benefits for people with incapacity and special needs trusts. The most popular section dealing with special needs trust is in 1396 of the Internal Revenue Code. So if you wanted to do a little reading, you would go look at 1396 and in particular 1396 D4. Now, this is all sort of Googleable, so you can kind of do a little bit of research here. So when you meet with your attorney, you have a little bit of an education about how these special needs trusts work and kind of how the rules work. But long story short, the why this works is because when you give this recipient money, you're not putting it in their name, you're putting it in a trust for their benefit, so that it's not counting against them for eligibility purposes. So that's why it's awesome. Now, how it works is that you're typically going to meet with an attorney to establish a trust document. Now, that can kind of take two main forms. One form is to have a trust that goes into effect basically immediately. In our office, we call those standalone trusts. So if I have some parents of a special need child, sometimes when that child is really young, they'll go ahead and create the trust right now, and they can begin to put money into it right now. So that's one way to do it. Now, the other way to do it is to create a trust inside of a will, or have a trust that goes into effect when you pass away. And so this is a form of trust that really you can't put money into it while you're alive, because it doesn't actually go into effect until after you've passed away. So those are the two main flavors, and then within that there's going to be a lot of specifics that depend on your particular situation and what works best for you and the rules that are going to apply to your beneficiary. And again, this is such a basic video just to kind of give you the rules, the basic rules, just because I want you to be informed when you go to meet with that attorney, because that attorney that's going to prepare that trust is going to need to know some details from you, such as when do you want the trust to begin, now or after you pass away, who's going to be putting money into that trust, and who do you want to be the trustee of that trust. And then when we talk about trustees, like the person who would be doling out the money for the beneficiary, that trustee, you're usually going to have at least one, if not a couple of alternates, in case the first in line becomes incapacitated or passes away. So now that you know this, you'll be prepared to answer those questions when you go and meet with your lawyer. So I hope you found this video helpful. I know this is a very basic video, but I wanted you to have that outline so that you'll know A, to go see an attorney, and B, to know some of the questions that attorney is going to ask you when you go to create that special needs trust. And again, my name's Isaac Shutt. I'm an estate planning attorney licensed both in Texas and in Wyoming.